with this, and we think this is a disastrous policy that isn't going to do anything about small boats in the Channel, but let's put that to one side. The Ministers and the Foreign Secretary must be aware of the grave misgivings across the Foreign Office officials about this policy. Can they name a single NGO who is in favour of this? And are they just glossing over the human rights concerns over the Rwandan government? Now, international development partnership with Rwanda is one thing. This is an entirely different case. Are they glossing over this in the cynical expectation that actually this policy is going to come to nothing, because that's the only thing that I can possibly think allows them to lend their credence to this disastrous policy?
Mr. Speaker, we're absolutely not glossing over our concerns over rights when it comes to, for example, space for political opposition, civil rights and media freedom. And indeed, I met the Permanent Secretary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Rwanda in London earlier this year and made those points to her. However, we do believe that when it comes to breaking the model of people traffickers that is causing lives to be put at risk across our channel, things need to be done. Doing nothing is not an option. And that is why the government of Rwanda have willingly entered into this partnership, because they also want to stop lives being put at risk.
Alexander Stafford.
Number 2, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 2 and 10 together. The use of rape and sexual violence in conflict is a war crime, and the UK is determined to tackle this scourge which devastates lives. That's why we're campaigning for it to be a red line, on a par with the use of chemical weapons.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for that answer. The reports of appalling widespread sexual violence being used by Russian soldiers in Ukraine is deeply disturbing. Does my right honourable friend agree the Murad Code is a vital step to ensure justice for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, and that we must send a strong message to Russia and Putin that rape as a weapon of war is evil and we must stamp it out?
Foreign Secretary.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. It is evil, and we have seen horrific sights in towns such as Bucha with rape and sexual violence being used to terrorise women and children. The UK is leading the charge to collect evidence of these crimes, and under our presidency of the UN Security Council, we have launched the Murad Code, which sets global standards for the effective evidence gathering on sexual violence.
Mr.
Speaker, today's Daily Telegraph includes the testimony of Anne, a 41-year-old woman from Ukraine who says she was raped by a 19-year-old soldier. I note that the UN Secretary General is meeting Mr. Putin today to discuss humanitarian aid, and I hope he will bring up the use of rape as a weapon of war, which the Russians seem to be using. With this in mind, does my right honourable friend agree with me that as the UN's charter mandate is to maintain international peace and security, perhaps it is time that the international community questioned whether Russia should remain a permanent member of the Security Council?
Foreign Secretary.
My honourable friend is right about the appalling reports in the Telegraph and other newspapers that we have seen as the use of rape in Ukraine. The Security Council does have a role to play. Under our presidency, we have used it to call out Russia's lies. We have also hosted President Zelensky to speak to the Council. But she is also right that we do have concerns about an international security architecture that has Russia as one of the permanent members of the Security Council, and they have used their veto as a green light for barbarism. And part of our response has been working more closely with allies like the G7, allies like NATO, because we simply haven't seen enough taking place at a UN level.
We now come to the Chair of the International Select Committee. Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's commitment to the Murad Code for survivors, but the Foreign Secretary knows that my commitment is on prevention. We know that women and girls in conflict zones are subjected to particular sexual violence. Rape continues without apparent consequence in Ukraine, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Myanmar, I could go on. So can I ask, what plans does the Foreign Secretary have to make tackling sexual violence a part of a broader cross-government atrocity prevention programme?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the Honourable Lady is right that we are seeing appalling cases, not just in Ukraine, but also in countries like Ethiopia. Later this year, the UK will host an international conference on preventing sexual violence in conflict. That will be in November. And we're working with counterparts like the Canadians on the idea of a new convention which puts sexual violence on the same level as the use of chemical weapons in terms of its use in war. And we are working across government, also with our domestic programme to prevent sexual violence too. We're also restoring our budget for women and girls, and one of the key parts of that budget is the work on preventing sexual violence. We'll shortly be releasing our new international development budget for 2022-23.
Anna McMorran.
Thank you. We are hearing heartbreaking stories of children forced to watch their mothers being raped and then murdered in Ukraine, rape being used as a weapon of war across conflict in Tigray in Ethiopia. The International Rescue Committee analysis reveals women and girls across conflict are experiencing widespread abuse and exploitation, including rape. So what is the government doing to stop this being used, both as a weapon of war, but also challenging the way that women are used, exploited within conflict across the world?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, she is right. This abhorrent policy is being used to terrorise women and children. It's being used to destroy communities and destroy the spirit, and it is a deliberate act. That is what we know. That is what the OSCE report on what is happening Ukraine shows. So first of all, we're working to collect the evidence. We have a number of bodies, including the Metropolitan Police. We're funding the ICC to collect evidence, and we will make sure the perpetrators are brought to justice. But more than that, we do need new international agreement on making this a red line used in war. It does need to be regarded on the same level as the use of chemical weapons. That has not yet happened. That is why the UK is hosting a conference later this year, and we're working with international partners on this. But she's absolutely right. It is appalling and abhorrent.
Chair of the Select Committee, Foreign Affairs, Tom Tugendar.
Thank you very much. I welcome enormously the words of my right honourable friend on sexual violence in conflict. We've seen the rape of Butcher, sadly, the rape of so many other towns and cities around the world, most notably in places like Ethiopia and Mali. Would my right honourable friend also, however, talk about sexual violence not in conflict? We are seeing forced genital mutilation of young women and girls around the world. We're seeing an extraordinary level of violence in ordinary life outside conflict. And the work that her department can do in helping communities to defend themselves is not just transforming them, but is actually transforming the economies and the future of those countries as well.
Foreign Secretary.
This is why restoring the women and girls budget is so important, which we will be doing as part of our new announcement on international development. And key focuses will be girls' education, ending the use of female genital mutilation, and preventing sexual violence in conflict, but also more broadly, because my honourable friend is right. If women don't have that basic security, then they're not going to be able to achieve their full potential. They're not going to have the opportunities. And ultimately, that is, of course, appalling for them, but it is also appalling for the societies they live in. And this is why we absolutely must start with the most vulnerable, which are women and children, in our international development policy.
Andrew Gwynn.
Sexual violence and rape is abhorrent anyway, but the use of it in conflict is a crime against humanity. I welcome very much what the Secretary of State has said about trying to get a convention in place that puts this on the same level as the use of chemical weapons. But for those women and children that are victims now, can she say what work she's doing with our allies to ensure that the perpetrators of these vile crimes are brought to account and the generals in charge of those soldiers are also gone after by the authorities, because these are war crimes?
They are war crimes. We are collecting the evidence. We have British people currently working with the Ukrainian government in Ukraine, collecting that evidence. We're working with the ICC. And if the ICC mechanisms aren't enough, we will find other ways of getting to the people, not just who perpetrated the crimes, but have ordered those crimes to be perpetrated. What we're also doing through the aid budget we've allocated to Ukraine is helping the victims. So we are helping the survivors of sexual violence. We're allocating money to local organisations to help those who've gone through the appalling trauma of being raped and being sexually abused in conflict.
Sarah.
Question 3, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 3 and 7 together. We have made clear that we, the UK, will defend democracy at the frontier of freedom in Eastern Europe as part of a network of liberty. We are strengthening our partnerships in the region, including on countering disinformation propaganda, on advancing trade and technology, and supporting transparent, accountable political processes through the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, the OSCE, and other institutions. On the 7th of April, my Right Honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, met with NATO foreign ministers and affirmed our commitment to defend and deter threats to the alliance members in Eastern Europe.
Sarah Atherton.
Mr. Speaker, now without doubt the UK is leading the way in providing military support to Eastern Europe, from sending manned T2 Challenger tanks to Poland to doubling the size of our deployment in Estonia. So can my honourable friend confirm that the UK is working closely with NATO allies to provide all the support that's required to defend democracy in Eastern Europe?
Minister.
I can assure my honourable friend that the UK will continue to play a leading role within NATO to respond to Putin's brutal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. I will myself tomorrow be flying out to NATO to meet our new permanent representative and our allies in that alliance. NATO has also announced the establishment of 4 additional multilateral battle groups in Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania and Slovakia. And as I say, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, and NATO foreign ministers have agreed increased support to regional partners to strengthen their resilience and their ability to defend themselves against cyber attack, disinformation, political interference and other physical and political threats to them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answer there. We're all moved, I think, by the Ukrainian people's fight to defend their own hard-won democratic freedoms, but in the region, several countries are still in transition, including Moldova and Georgia, but also NATO allies, such as Albania and North Macedonia. Can I ask the Minister then what work the FCDO is engaged in to support reform so that all peoples in Eastern Europe can experience the same democratic freedoms as we have in the UK?
Minister.
My honourable friend is right that there are many countries in the immediate vicinity of Ukraine who are suffering pressure. And the UK is supporting democratic reform across the South Caucasus, in Moldova and the Western Balkans, including through programmes that support the strengthening of democratic freedoms, to deliver the reform programmes and to reduce corruption. And we're also working with partners in the Western Balkans to support their Euro-Atlantic integration, which is in itself a stimulus to reform.
Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Britain's army is smaller than it's been at any time for 200 years, and we currently have plans to reduce personnel for our armed forces by a further 20,000 individuals. Would he agree that if we're going to stand by our allies in Central and Eastern Europe, we need to be in a position where we are militarily strong enough to do so?
Minister.
The right honourable gentleman will understand that ultimately the question that he poses is more properly answered by Defence Ministers. However, I can assure him that the close working between the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, the Ministry of Defence and our international partners will ensure that the UK remains absolutely a top-tier defence country within NATO, and we will continue to support our NATO allies and countries in the region to defend themselves against both physical and digital threats.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Many of the countries of Eastern Europe chose to join NATO as soon as they were free to do so, because they regard membership of the defensive alliance as essential to their security and their democracy. As a result of Russia's invasion, Finland and Sweden are now currently considering whether to make such an application. The Foreign Secretary has made it clear that the UK would support an application if it was forthcoming. Is the Minister confident that in that event that NATO would agree to admit Finland and Sweden to the NATO alliance?
I think the phrase that comes to mind is that when people are free to choose, they choose freedom. And in this instance, there are a number of countries who are seriously considering joining NATO. And he says Finland and Sweden predominantly. I have no doubt that their application will be considered seriously by NATO member states. They are both serious defence players in their own right, and our view would be they would be an asset to NATO. Ultimately, the choice is for the peoples of those countries, but as my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, has said, we would look very favourably upon that application.
The Minister, Stephen Doherty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it was good to hear the Minister mention the situation in the Western Balkans, where, of course, democracy and stability are under threat, not just from Putin's Russia, but also from those who would seek to generate chaos locally. And therefore, I welcome the sanctions that the government's announced against Republika Srpska leader Dodik and others, an issue we raised back in March. Could the Minister therefore say what wider discussions he's having with our allies and indeed the special representatives in the region and with Serbia to maintain peace, democracy and stability in Bosnia, in Kosovo and beyond, and to counter Russian and domestic threats to undermine all of those?
The honourable gentleman makes some very important points about the fragility of the countries in that region. The Prime Minister has recently appointed Stuart Peach, very experienced, very highly regarded, and he has been very active already in his engagement with the region. I have met with him already and intend to do so again. On my visits to Eastern Europe, have discussed some of the challenges with regard to the Western Balkans, and as he has said, we've recently imposed a series of sanctions against the leadership of Republika Srpska, who need to be reminded that the best way forward for that country is through democracy and support for the rule of law.
Jane Barry.
Mr. Speaker, democracy is ultimately built on hope. In response to a recent question to the Prime Minister about my suggestion that we fund a new Marshall Plan for Ukraine funded by seized Russian assets, he responded by saying this is something my government is working on. Could the Minister update the House as to what work is taking place in his department?
Minister.
My right honourable friend makes an incredibly important point. We are currently supporting both Ukraine and Eastern European countries through our humanitarian support to deal with the initial and immediate pressures. What we can do in terms of reparations is ultimately a matter that will need to be done at a foreign minister level, both within the UK and internationally. But I take, and I'm sure the government takes this suggestion very seriously indeed.
Linden.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I'd like to answer questions 4 and 6 together. We welcome the US Middle East Partnership for Peace Act and the proposals for increased international funding for Israeli-Palestinian peace. We share the objective of advancing economic, social and political connections and peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. We stand ready to coordinate and collaborate further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The recent attacks in Israel and violence in Jerusalem and Gaza are a reminder of how urgent it is to support projects that bring Israelis and Palestinians together. So can the Minister now confirm to this House when the UK will join the board of the International Fund for Israeli-Palestine Peace?
Minister.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her question. UK officials remain in close contact with the US government about how our existing peace-building projects and funding can better support the goals of the Act, and we stand ready to coordinate and collaborate further, including regarding the Act's Advisory Board, as additional information about its plans and priorities become available.
Wayne David.
Recent violence in the West Bank and in Israel itself underline the need for an international fund for Israeli and Palestinian peace. But such a fund will not just happen. It actually requires positive support from governments around the world, including and especially this government. Yet the truth is that our government is paying only lip service to it. So when will the government remember the success of the International Fund for Ireland and learn the lessons of that success?
Minister.
As I say, what we all want to see is a safe and secure Israel. And we want to be able to have a two-state solution that enables us to do that and also delivers Palestinian self-determination. And as I say, we are working with the US government about these projects and the funding that can support their act. And in terms of, as and when we have more information about the plans and the priorities, we will coordinate with them.
Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
Mr. Speaker, the last few weeks have seen spiralling tension and violence in Israel and Palestine. A dozen Israelis killed in a spate of horrific terrorist attacks, more than 20 Palestinians killed in response, including the senseless killing of a teenager and a human rights lawyer. We remain resolutely committed to the goal of a two-state solution, but it feels a very distant prize at present. So can I ask the Minister what she's doing to try and remove the barriers to peace, including ensuring respect of holy sites like the Al-Aqsa Mosque, preventing Hamas rocket attacks, ending the expansion of illegal settlements, and finally recognising Palestine as a state?
Minister.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his question, and we are deeply concerned about the very fragile security situation. And we are working actively with key partners, including members of the UN Security Council and both parties, to encourage de-escalation of tensions. Because, as he says, there have been some horrific attacks, and, we do want to see the situation de-escalated, and we are having those conversations to ensure that we play our part in terms of preventing further escalation.
SNP spokesperson Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the UK's funding to UNRWA, the UN's relief agency for Palestinian refugees, has been cut by more than 50% last year. UNRWA provides essential services to Palestinian refugees in the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Lebanon and Syria, but, and I quote, it's been described as close to collapse due to funding shortfalls. So can we truly say, as Ambassador Allen stated to the UN Security Council in 2018, that the United Kingdom strongly supports peace between Israelis and Palestinians, when it simultaneously sells arms to one side and cuts humanitarian aid to the other?
So I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. And as I've said, we are committed to a two-state solution as the best way to deliver Palestinian self-determination and a safe and secure Israel. And my right honourable friend, the member for Braintree, announced in December last year that we were providing £27 million to support UNRWA, including £4.9 million for their flash bill following the Gaza conflict in May.
Bob Blackman.
Question number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Foreign Secretary.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 5 and 15 together. India is the world's largest democracy and a key partner of the United Kingdom. We're deepening our defence and security ties, as well as securing a trade deal by the end of the year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend not only for her answer, but the tremendous work she's been doing since she became Foreign Secretary to deepen the relationship with India. And indeed, the Prime Minister's visit last week built on that relationship that we have. Clearly, there's a need for not only for defence, trade and other opportunities, but there is also a requirement to move India away from its relationship with Russia. So what is my right honourable friend going to do to ensure that our friendship continues with India and that it's moved back towards the West?
Well, my honourable friend is a huge champion for the Indian community in Harrow East, and he's absolutely right. India is a democracy. We want to work more closely with India and other democracies to reduce dependence on authoritarian regimes like Russia. And the way we can do that is working more closely on India with defence, which is what the Prime Minister was doing on his visit to India last week, more closely on trade and on regimes like Russia who have ill intent.
Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Following on from that, will my right honourable friend join me in welcoming the progress particularly made by the Prime Minister last week to boost security in the Pacific. And can she confirm that following his trip, the UK will continue to work very closely with our friends in India to deliver a more secure and also a more prosperous future for both our peoples here in the UK and in India?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, that's right. First of all, we're working more closely with India on defence to benefit industries in both of our countries, but also to make our countries more secure and less dependent on authoritarian regimes. At the same time, we're going to be delivering more commercial benefits. When the Prime Minister was in India, he confirmed deals of over £1 billion, creating almost 11,000 new jobs in the United Kingdom. And there are huge opportunities for more jobs in India, more jobs in the United Kingdom, and more security for both of our countries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, before his visit to India, I wrote to the Prime Minister urging him to raise the human rights abuses against the Kashmiris, the increasingly Islamophobic direction of the Modi government, the persecution of minorities. However, it seems that the Prime Minister did not even think worth a mention to these grave human rights abuses, which is frankly disgraceful. The government can't pick and choose human rights abuses around the world that favour them. When will this government fulfil its international obligation to the Kashmiris and those persecuted by this right-wing Modi government in India?
Foreign Secretary.
On the subject of Kashmir, we encourage both sides to engage in dialogue and find lasting diplomatic solutions to maintain regional stability. And we do raise our concerns with both the governments of India and Pakistan.
Barry Sherman. Or is it Jim Shannon then?
Mr. Speaker, can I also follow the honourable gentleman? And while it's very important that we strengthen the UK's economic and security relationships with India, it's also equally important that we address the issue of human rights abuses, the persecution of Christians, the persecution of Muslims. So equally, can I ask the Minister or the Secretary of State this question? What discussions have taken place to ensure, when it comes to addressing persecution of Christians, persecution of Muslims and the abuse of human rights in India, that something has been done and that India does listen?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, of course, we raise the issue of human rights with the Indian government. In fact, later on this summer, we are going to be hosting a conference in London on the subject of religious freedom, led by my friend, the member for Congleton. This is a very, very important issue for us. But looking at the big picture, there is a huge opportunity for the United Kingdom to work more closely with India in the face of some appalling authoritarian regimes, particularly Russia, who has staged an unwarranted, unjustified invasion of Ukraine. And it is very important that leading democracies across the world stand up for freedom, stand up for democracy, and work together.
We now come to Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
Mr. Speaker, to isolate Putin on the global stage, we must build the largest possible coalition against his illegal war. India is one country which has so far stayed neutral. The Prime Minister spent last week in India, but Number 10 admitted that the Prime Minister failed to even mention India's neutrality in his meeting with President Modi. This follows the Foreign Secretary's own failed trip to India, where she failed to demonstrate any progress in bringing India into the international coalition condemning Putin's aggression against Ukraine. Will the Foreign Secretary explain why that was a failure and commit to ask her counterparts in India to oppose Putin's barbaric war?
Foreign Secretary.
Of course, I have discussed the issue of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine with the Indian government. But if the honourable gentleman thinks the right approach for Britain is to go around finger-wagging to the rest of the world rather than working to build strong relationships and partnerships to attract India and others to work more closely with us, he is completely wrong. On both my visit and the Prime Minister's visit, we've succeeded in moving forward our relationships on trade, on investment, on defence, generating jobs in Britain, generating jobs in India, with the ultimate goal of working more closely together as fellow democracies and moving away from dependence on authoritarian regimes. The fact is, the right honourable gentleman prefers gesture politics to actually getting things done.
Giles Watling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 8, if you please.
Front bench, who's answering? Front bench, who's answering? It's number 8, who's on?
Sorry.
Can somebody on the front bench please answer the question?
I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Speaker. I couldn't hear my colleague over the noise in the House. The UK has been an energetic Commonwealth chair in office, working to strengthen collaboration and coordination right across our Commonwealth family, including on recovery from COVID, trade, investment and climate. Last week, as we've been discussing, the Prime Minister has visited India. The Foreign Secretary has also visited India as well as Australia. I visited South Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Lesotho and Eswatini. And if I was to tell you where Lord Ahmed has been, we would be here until tomorrow.
Giles Watling.
I thank my honourable friend for her answer. I'm normally heard wherever I go. With the recent royal tour to the Caribbean and the Prime Minister's visit to India in mind, does my honourable friend agree that in this post-Brexit world we should make that the strengthening of that great family of democracies, the Commonwealth, a top priority?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend and Essex neighbour about the importance of the Commonwealth, and we are committed to deepening our ties with all Commonwealth countries, including trade. We've already signed free trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand, and we look forward to concluding one with India this year. We have got economic partnerships with 27 Commonwealth countries. We're working closely with many Commonwealth partners on global challenges such as climate and health, underpinned by over £500 million of international investment. And members of this government are deeply looking forward to attending CHOGM in Kigali, Rwanda in June.
Russian Rally.
Question number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In February 2022, to mark a year since the coup, the UK coordinated a joint statement agreed by 36 countries and secured a strong UN Security Council press statement which called for a return to democracy. We also sanctioned 3 individuals for undermining democracy and the rule of law.
I thank the Minister for that answer, but since the military coup on the 1st of February 2021, the Myanmar military has carried out brutal crackdowns aimed at suppressing widespread public opposition to its rule. Almost 500,000 people have been displaced, partly due to airstrikes or the threat of airstrikes. So can the Minister confirm if her government will introduce sanctions on Burmese companies that supply aviation to the military and British companies involved in any aspect of the supply of aviation fuel, including shipping and insurance services?
Minister.
I thank the honourable lady for her question. I also want to thank her for everything that she does in terms of in Myanmar and ensuring that actually we're having this discussion, because it is really important, that we keep a focus on the situation in Myanmar. And I'd like to reassure her that I do have many conversations with counterparts when I'm doing visits. And I just wanted to say that we work closely with partners to put pressure on the regime to de-escalate the crisis, included through targeted sanctions against individuals and entities who are providing support for the military. But what I would say is, obviously, I couldn't talk about future sanctions.
Bruce.
Number 11, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, promoting freedom of religion or belief is one of the UK's longest-standing human rights priorities. We are making good progress on implementing the Bishop of Churo's recommendations to support everyone persecuted for their religion or belief. We're looking forward to hosting an international ministerial conference on freedom of religion or belief in July to drive forward international efforts to promote openness and freedom.
Fiona Bruce.
Yes, can I thank the Foreign Secretary for her strong support for the International Conference on Freedom of Religion or Belief, which the UK Government is hosting in July. And do Ministers agree this will be an excellent opportunity to showcase how FORB is a priority for the UK Government to many government ministers from across the world who we hope to welcome to that event, which will, we expect, be the largest UK-hosted international event of 2022.
Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for the outstanding work that she does across the world on behalf of the Prime Minister as the PM's Envoy on freedom of religion and belief. And I know she's really concerned, and she's right to be concerned about increase in attacks and the increased severity of attacks on freedom of religion of belief. It will be an enormously important conference that the UK is going to be leading in July. We'll be welcoming partner countries and stakeholders from all across the world, and I know that the Foreign Secretary is looking forward very much to attending and taking part.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your tolerance with me this morning. Can I ask the Minister to meet with Christians in Parliament to discuss this subject? We talked an earlier question about the links with the Commonwealth, and there are certain Commonwealth countries in which we know children and adults are persecuted for their faith. And could we do something about that? And a good communication between those of us in the active Christians in this House and the Minister would be most appreciated.
Minister.
I would be very happy to meet with Christians in Parliament as a Christian, but I will also be very happy to meet with other faith groups and indeed those who hold no faith. Thank you for the invitation.
We now go to topicals. Karen Butt. Number 1, Foreign Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, despite having failed in his initial aims, Putin continues his barbaric war in Ukraine. The United Kingdom, together with our allies, have stepped up sanctions and lethal aid. We have put more sanctions on than any other nation, including on oligarchs and banks, and we've supplied everything from hundreds of Starstreak anti-air missiles to ammunition. This week, our Ambassador, Melinda Simmons, is returning to our reopened embassy in Kyiv, and we will continue to back Ukraine until they prevail and Putin fails.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In addition to the devastating impact of the conflict in Ukraine itself, we know now, and we have the IMF report showing that this is having an impact on world food prices, particularly affecting some of the poorest communities in the world. In Yemen alone, there is evidence that food prices have increased by 150%. Can she tell us what assessment the Department has had of the impact of rising food prices in some of the world's conflict zones, and what the government's response is going to be to deal with that?
Speed it up.
Well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. We are working closely with our international allies. We committed extra billions at the spring meetings last week to help provide that food aid to the rest of the world. And we're also restoring our own humanitarian budget as part of our aid budget in the United Kingdom to help deal with this crisis.
Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's already been mention this morning of the independent review that of persecuted Christians carried out in 2019 by the Bishop of Truro, and that it has its own formal review this summer. The Foreign and Commonwealth Office has made progress in adopting the recommendations of the report, but can I ask my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, whether she can assure this House of further progress in this area by the summer?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm working very closely with my honourable friend, the member for Congleton, who's our religious freedom envoy. I'm pleased to be hosting and attending the Global Summit to promote the freedom of religion in July, and we continue to make progress on implementing all of the recommendations of the Truro Review.
Shadow Minister Pleatgill.
Mr. Speaker, wars rage in Africa, the Middle East and now Ukraine, a growing climate crisis, surging food prices, 300,000 children face death by starvation in Somalia, and Britain's own reputation in tatters after 2 years of callous aid cuts and shutting down the world-renowned Department for International Development. It's clear, Mr. Speaker, that Britain needs a strategy for long-term development to stop lurching from crisis to crisis. So can the Secretary of State confirm today exactly when the new strategy will be published, and will it be backed with the funding, focus, ambition and expertise needed to make a lasting difference in the world?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, we will be publishing our new development strategy this spring, and there are some key elements to that strategy. First of all, we will be restoring the budget for women and girls. We will be restoring the budget for humanitarian aid. And in the face of the appalling crisis in Ukraine, we've already committed £220 million of development funding, and we're one of the largest donors.
Robin Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Across Keighley and Ilkley, there is no shortage of goodwill to help those that are affected by the conflict in Ukraine, including from the Ilkley Surround Support and Ukrainian Evacuees volunteer group led by Caroline Hurd, who are working to help those seek refuge within our community. This is, of course, dependent on the government working with our European counterparts to ensure safe passage of refugees from Ukraine. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary what discussions she has had with her counterparts to make sure this happens?
Secretary.
Well, first of all, I congratulate my honourable friend for the fantastic work that he's doing together with the local community in Keighley and Ilkley. It's fantastic, and we're seeing people across Britain really contribute to the effort to support the people of Ukraine. We've now all issued over 70,000 visas to Ukrainians, and what we are doing is working with the foreign ministers right across Europe to make sure we're completely coordinated, particularly with those governments close by like the Poles.
Shadow Minister Man Butterall.
We're now 3 weeks into the UN-sponsored truce in Yemen, which has resulted in the release of 14 foreign captives, including UK national Luke Simmons and his family, and which is also intended to open roads, allow fuel through the port of Hadida, and allow commercial flights from Sana'a to Jordan and Egypt. But this truce is a fragile truce which could collapse at any minute. So can the Minister tell me what steps the UK is taking to support Hans Grudberg and the UN Special Envoy for Yemen to keep the peace and prevent a return to conflict and the re-escalation of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and the UK does welcome the 2-month truce announcement in Yemen, and I would like to reassure the honourable gentleman that we continue to support the UN Special Envoy and coordinate closely with international and regional partners.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend update the House on the £40 million support package over 10 years announced in 2016 for the Chagos Island community?
Minister.
I would like to thank my honourable friend for his question, and also thank him for being such a strong voice for the Chagossian community, because I do know that he has a large Chagossian community in his constituency of Crawley. And, you know, we've gone to great lengths to find projects for this money which will benefit the Chagossian community, and I would like to be able to meet with my honourable friend to discuss what more we can do.
Thank you
very much. Mr. Speaker, according to Human Rights Watch, in their World Report 2020, the Rwandan regime is active in, and I quote, the arbitrary detention, ill treatment and torture in official and unofficial detention facilities. So despite the nonchalant dismissal by the Home Secretary in the Chamber recently for the legitimate concerns over the safety of asylum seekers, what mechanisms will the Foreign Secretary exercise in the oversight of these detention facilities to ensure that the same ill treatment and torture does not befall the already vulnerable human beings that this Tory government will be callously shipping off to Rwanda?
Minister.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his question, and can I make it very clear that there's an agreement between the government of Rwanda and the government of the UK has agreed with the Home Office to make sure that the rights of those who go from the UK to Rwanda are protected. But can I just point to him that just last month, the UN Refugee Agency sent 119 refugees to Rwanda, and the UN themselves described it as a very safe country. And in December, the UN themselves said that Rwanda had done an excellent job in integrated refugees. So please do look at what is being said right now about how Rwanda is caring for these people with kindness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Exmouth has welcomed Afghan refugees and families while the government works hard to find a long-term accommodation around the UK. Sadly, some of their friends and family stayed behind. What reassurances can my right honourable friend give that UK aid reaches those who need it most in Afghanistan, not the Taliban?
Minister.
Last month, the UK co-hosted a donor conference with the UN, Qatar and Germany, raised over £2.4 billion. We work through international agencies to ensure the money gets to the people that it needs, including to ensure that half the money reaches women and girls who are particularly vulnerable in Afghanistan at the moment. And we will continue to press the Taliban to stand up to their international commitments and our international friends to ensure the money is received by the appropriate people.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The recent fire in Hargeisa market has had a terrible effect on the people of Somaliland and their livelihoods. I understand the FCDO is supportive, and that is great, but what actual practical help will be given to the people of Hargeisa to help rebuild their lives?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it was a devastating fire in Hargeisa market. The UK is leading diplomatic and development response efforts on the ground, including by chairing an international coordination group which has visited the site and is assessing potential response options. And this week our ambassador met with the President, senior cabinet members and the Mayor of Hargeisa and the Fire Service Commander to help shape our response. We are leading the international community but also working with the locals on the ground.
Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The decision from the Taliban to suspend secondary classes for girls in Afghanistan was deeply disappointing. So can the Minister confirm that the government is working with our international allies to continue to pressurise the Taliban to allow equal access to all levels of education?
My honourable friend makes an incredibly important point about the internationally about the importance of education of girls and the support for women. I can assure him that the UK will always push to increase the availability of education for girls, particularly in Afghanistan, and will also push to make sure that our money and international money reaches the people most in need and does not get siphoned off by the Taliban regime.
Stimboller.
Mr. Speaker, last month Saudi teenager Abdullah al-Hawati was given a second death sentence for a crime he was accused of committing as a 14-year-old child. Sentencing a child to death is a violation of international law, and the Reprieve have strongly condemned this move. Will the Secretary of State make representations to Saudi counterparts on behalf of this House to prevent such a grotesque miscarriage of justice and violation of the rights of the child?
Minister.
I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman for his question, and I'll happily follow up on that particular case after this session.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, the people of both Myanmar and Ukraine are risking their lives to continue fighting for freedoms that have been taken away. In both countries, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy was running projects making a real difference on bolstering their democracies until the men with guns moved in. Today is the 30th anniversary of the Westminster Foundation, which you, Mr. Speaker, are a patron of, and many members across the House have played an active role for a generation in promoting peace and democracy around the world, currently in about 30 countries. The Foreign Secretary has recently resolved our funding issues. Would my right honourable friend agree to playing a leading role in events celebrating this anniversary and ensure that her department continues to give its own in-house Open Societies champion every chance to do even more good work?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I am pleased that we were able to resolve the funding issues so the Westminster Foundation for Democracy can continue its excellent work. And what we are learning as a result of the Ukraine crisis is the strength of democracies in fighting back and in fighting for what they believe in. And it's organisations like the Westminster Foundation for Democracy that help provide the intellectual ballast for them to do so.
Minoritarian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Spanish government stands accused of using Pegasus, the controversial Israeli spyware, to hack into the phone of a Scottish solicitor who was representing Professor Clara Ponsati, Catalonia's former education minister and now a member of the European Parliament. Does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that if this occurred, it would be a disgraceful breach of solicitor-client privilege and a direct attack on a democratically elected politician? And will the Foreign Secretary take this matter up with the Spanish ambassador next time she meets with them?
Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable lady in this House that we have a very strong international relationship with Spain. We're able to raise all kinds of issues. I am not going to speculate on the details or comment on the details she's raised. I have no way of corroborating them, but I can assure her that this government will always stand up for the rule of law and the willingness to support that. So,
my right honourable friend will be aware that next Tuesday is World Press Freedom Day, yet free media is under greater pressure than ever before, particularly in Russia, where independent journalism has been ruthlessly suppressed. Well, does she agree that the need for independent news providers like the BBC World Service is greater than ever, and will she ensure that they continue to receive all the funding that they need?
Minister.
My right honourable friend and neighbour is absolutely correct. We totally condemn Russia's attack on Ukraine and the lies that Russia is using to promote it. They're seeking to undermine Ukraine's sovereignty, obscure the truth, hide war crimes, and independent media, including the World Service, is vital. So we're providing the World Service with over 90 million this year, but we've also created a government information cell. This is to counter Russian information and make sure the people of Russia can access the truth.
Alan Brown.
When words is not enough, sometimes action's required to bring about change. So when's the UK going to ban the import of goods that are produced in the Israeli settlements that they deem to be illegal in international law?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and we're very clear in terms of our position in terms of the settlements. They are illegal under international law, and we do urge Israel to end its settlement expansion, and it's something that we do raise with our counterparts.
General.
My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, had an opportunity to raise the case of my constituent Aidan Aslin and also Sean Pinner with her Ukrainian and Russian counterparts. These two British citizens continue to be held in captivity and to be tortured and abused for propaganda purposes by the Russian military, which I hope all of us in this House will uniformly condemn. We want to see these individuals released as soon as possible.
Minister.
I have discussed the issue of foreign volunteer fighters with the Ukrainian government. They are clear, we are clear, that those fighting under the Ukrainian flag for the Ukrainian armed forces in defence of Ukraine should be treated as Ukrainian military and treated as prisoners of war with all the protections that international humanitarian law accords to those individuals.
Rachel Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 21st of April, an attack targeting the Hazara Mosque in Afghanistan killed 30 people and injured 80. The violence and the dangerous situation is getting worse. So what steps is the Minister taking to protect minoritized communities in Afghanistan and bring them to a place of safety in the UK?
Minister.
My right honourable friend in the other place, the Noble Lord Ahmed, discusses these issues with regional partners regularly. The UK remains committed to ensuring the protection of minorities. We will hold the Taliban to the words, to the commitments that they have made, and ensure that where possible we work with international partners to push them to the protection of ethnic minority, religious minorities and other vulnerable people in Afghanistan.
Anthony Bagnall, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Secretary's work on combating sexual violence in conflict and the fact they've upgraded money for this area. But can I ask that if she recognises that the ICC and the UN does not bring better outcomes for survivors of sexual violence and bring perpetrators for justice, we need to look at a new international mechanism that the UK could lead?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I certainly agree with my honourable friend that we do need to bring these perpetrators to justice. That's why we're funding the ICC to do more, as well as collecting our own evidence and working with the Ukrainians. But if there is a new mechanism needed, then we would be prepared to lead the work on that. And I think our conference later this year on the prevention of sexual violence is a good opportunity to do that.
Yeah. Right, we now come to the urgent question, where I call the SNP leader Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Prime Minister if he will make a statement on his recent visit to India.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker. I thought we treated women with respect in this place. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister visited New Delhi and Gujarat on the 21st and 22nd of April to deepen our comprehensive strategic partnership with India. The relationship between the UK and India is one of friends, partners and equals. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has shown the importance of greater and deeper partnerships between democracies. This visit enhanced our objectives on green growth, security and defence, as well as trade. Security and defence is a vital element of our growing partnership. The Prime Minister discussed next-generation defence and security collaboration, including through supporting the Make in India approach to security and defence. They outlined a commitment in a joint cyber statement to deepen cooperation across cyber governance, deterrence and strengthening cyber resilience. The UK also issued an Open General Export Licence, OGEL, to India, reducing bureaucracy and shortening delivery times for defence procurement. This is the first for a country in the Indo-Pacific. Another priority is our trade and prosperity relationship. The Prime Minister agreed with Prime Minister Modi to conclude the majority of talks on a comprehensive and balanced free trade agreement by the end of October this year. UK and Indian businesses also confirmed more than £1 billion in new investments and export deals, creating almost 11,000 jobs here in the UK. The Prime Minister and Prime Minister Modi discussed cooperation on clean and renewable energy, aimed at supporting India's energy transition away from imported oil and increasing its energy security. We launched a hydrogen science and innovation hub to accelerate affordable green hydrogen, as well as committing new funding for the Green Grids initiative announced at COP26. In addition, the Prime Minister also confirmed major new collaboration on science and technology.
Ian Blackford with 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Minister for being here, but of course this was a question to the Prime Minister. And Mr. Speaker, there is a clear convention that Prime Ministers have a duty to update this House following their attendance at major summits or following significant visits. This convention has been respected and followed by all Prime Ministers in recent years. But like on so many other matters, the only exception to that rule is the current Prime Minister. Following his visit last week, the Prime Minister should have come to this House and given an update. He has once again failed to do so. Instead, he chose to go campaigning for his party in the local elections, though I suspect that won't do them much good. But this Prime Minister failing to come before this House is by no means a one-off. He has failed to come before the House after the extraordinary NATO summit in March. There is a very clear pattern here. This is a Prime Minister who has no respect for the office he occupies and even less respect for this House. But now that the Minister has fronted up for his boss, let me ask her a number of questions. Can the Minister provide an update in terms of what discussions were had with Prime Minister Modi regarding the deteriorating situation in Kashmir? We all know how difficult and delicate this region is. It requires constant vigilance and attention. Putin's war in Europe is rightly our collective focus, but we must not lose sight of other countries and regions where conflict and violence is a constant threat. Can the Minister also give some more details on any progress that has been made towards a free trade deal? Reports suggest October is the timeline for its completion. Is that accurate? And what reassurance can the Minister give to our farming and crofting communities who have already been badly undercut by post-Brexit trade deals this government has negotiated? And given the many concerns about ongoing human rights violations in the country, what provisions will be made in any free trade deal to promote and protect our values? Finally, can the Minister give a guarantee that whoever the Prime Minister happens to be in the next few months, they will again follow convention, come before this House and give statements on significant visits?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I do think that my honourable friend opposite should be congratulating the Prime Minister at going to visit what is one of the world's largest and oldest democracies, with whom we have a deep and broad relationship. It is the world's 6th largest economy, set to be the world's 3rd largest by 2050. It's got a population bigger than the US and EU combined, and the relationship between democracies, especially at this time with democracies under threat, is absolutely vital. He asked about the current trade deal. It would supercharge the growth of our trading relationship. And can I point to him that products like Scotch whisky, let alone cars, currently face tariffs of over 100%. So I do see that there could be particular benefits for the people of Scotland in agreeing with this trade deal. If he had been here to listen to the Foreign Secretary speaking earlier, she answered questions on the relationship with Kashmir, and I'm sure we will come to that later in this session.
Theresa Villiers.
Does the Minister share my frustration that so often the reputation of India over human rights is traduced in this place unreasonably? Yes, of course, the long-standing dispute in Kashmir gives rise to complexities and suffering, but we must always remember that India is a democracy which respects the rule of law and which is doing its best to deal with a very difficult security situation in Kashmir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend speaks so eloquently of the subject. India is one of the world's oldest democracies. There is a unique living bridge, including 1.6 million strong India diaspora in the UK, that connects our countries in so many ways. And we must continue to have close and honest and open friendships with countries like Rwanda, because it is important to have a friendship so that you can raise issues that are also concerning, such as human rights issues when they come up.
We now come to the Shadow Minister, Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Conservative Prime Ministers being abroad when their leadership is under threat is not something new in our politics. But a Conservative Prime Minister abroad seeking to negotiate binding legal commitments from other world leaders when they have themselves broken the law is new. And the Prime Minister should be here giving a statement. Instead, we have a Prime Minister whose moral authority is so sullied, whose political authority is so weak. He did not challenge India to change its official stance of neutrality on the appalling, illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine. India has a right to remain neutral, but why would a UK Prime Minister waste such an opportunity to at least try and convince our Indian friends to join us in standing up to Putin's aggression? It sends a worrying message that our Prime Minister lacks both the ambition and the ability to effectively use Britain's diplomatic clout to influence others. And Mr. Speaker, there were also questions raised when the Prime Minister visited a JCB factory owned by a Conservative donor, when bulldozers were being used on properties owned by Muslim people, yet the issue of communal violence and human rights breaches were not even raised by the Prime Minister, despite him promising he would do so. That is not standing up for Britain and our values on the world stage. That is a moral failure from a Prime Minister too distracted by trying to save his own job. And on trade specifically, the Prime Minister spoke about a deal by October. Now, Labour values the historic link with India and the growth of trade, but we must set the standard high, not engage in a race to the bottom. So can the Minister confirm what the Prime Minister said to Prime Minister Modi about human rights, about binding commitments on climate change, what he expects on labour standards and trade union rights, on gender equality, on protecting our public services, and how he'll prevent the outsourcing of UK jobs to India? What will the Prime Minister do to support exporters to take advantage of trade opportunities? And can the Minister confirm, she mentioned Scotch whisky, so is the negotiating aim for the removal of tariffs altogether? And finally, what will the Prime Minister do to meaningfully involve business, trade unions and civil society in the negotiating process itself, so they are not presented with a take-it-or-leave-it deal at the end of the negotiations?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, so as regards Ukraine, the British Prime Minister and Prime Minister Modi released a statement immediately after that meeting, unequivocally condemning civilian deaths and reiterating the need for an immediate cessation of hostilities and for a peaceful resolution of the conflict. You might like to take a look at that. We are aware of recent reports that properties were demolished in New Delhi and other states, and we do condemn any instance of discrimination because of freedom of religion or belief, regardless of the country or the faith involved. Where we have concerns, we raise them directly with the Government of India, and our network of Deputy High Commissions will continue to follow these reports closely, whilst also recognising that this is a matter for India. He asks about the free trade agreement. A free trade agreement could supercharge the growth of our trading relationship. The relationship already totalled over £23 billion in 2019. There is a great opportunity here to forge a new economic partnership to the benefits of both of our countries. The benefits information published at the time of the launch provides detailed information on what the UK is seeking from the deal and the reasons for that, but we are just at the start of talks, and we need to make sure that the final deal is mutually beneficial and acceptable to both countries, as you know. So more information on the shape and scope of the FTA will be made available at an appropriate time, as is normal, as negotiations progress.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You and I were looking forward to a visit to India during the Easter recess, but we, of course, witnessed the Prime Minister's visit as a groundbreaking visit, the first Prime Minister to visit the state of Gujarat, which, of course, was where Sri Narendra Modi was Chief Minister, and indeed is the powerhouse of the Indian economy. And wherever Gujaratis have come, and many live in the UK, of course, they bring with them the economic power and the ability to contribute to our economy quite directly. Will my right friend confirm that it is the plan to conclude the free trade talks by Diwali, so that we can have a double celebration of Diwali, the Hindu New Year, as well as a new opportunity for a free trade deal between our two great countries? Yeah.
Minister.
Well, I know my honourable friend is a great supporter of the people of India, and indeed has many members of the Indian diaspora living in his own constituency, and he is always incredibly good at standing up for them and wanting to have closer ties between our countries. I can say that the two Prime Ministers agreed that they want to conclude the majority of the talks on the comprehensive and balanced free trade agreement by the end of October, and I hope that will give us all something to celebrate in the autumn.
Valerie Vars.
Speaker, the Minister said we're at the start of the negotiations, so can she confirm that the trade unions, business and civil society will be included in any discussions in both countries?
Mr. Speaker, in terms of the details of the negotiations, I'm afraid she's going to have to discuss that with my counterparts in the Department for Trade. But I do know that there has been a public consultation which showed that there are a significant number of barriers to prevent UK companies trading and investing in India. And we do want to reduce barriers, but we must also listen to those involved across the UK. But she really does need to make sure this is raised with a Minister of Trade.
Rob Butler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The partnership between the UK and India is, of course, of vital importance to both of our nations, but also important for global peace and security. So, can my honourable friend confirm that the UK government will continue to discuss global security matters with India?
Absolutely, my honourable friend is spot on. It is completely vital at this time that countries that believe in democracy come together and work more closely against authoritarian regimes, against aggression, and in favour of global security.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister had been here today, I would have inquired whether, while he was in India, he impressed upon the Indian Prime Minister the fact that the increase of £2 billion in trade with Russia at a time when we had sanctions against Ukraine potentially undermined a position, whether he tried to persuade the Prime Minister that this was not an acceptable route for the UK for a trading partner. Notwithstanding the statement which she read out earlier, can the Minister assure us that the Prime Minister made the case for sanctions against Russia
to the Indian government?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank her for her point. I'd like to point again that the two Prime Ministers made a joint statement condemning the civilian deaths that have occurred by the Russian invasion, calling for an end to all hostilities. One of the key issues that we were in India with was about increasing our defence and security partnership, and this is about helping India to become more self-reliant so that India itself is less reliant on imports that it gets from other countries.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the strengthening of relations between two great democracies, the UK and India. And in that vein, what discussions did the Prime Minister have with his Indian counterparts on the defence of democracy against growing threats from autocracies, not only in the Indian Ocean region, but also in Europe as well?
Minister.
So, absolutely a key part of this was about great democracies coming together to stand against aggressor states. But what we did discuss was, and what the Prime Minister did discuss, was their commitment to transform defence and security cooperation to enhance engagements of support in support of a free, open and secure Indo-Pacific. And that whole part of the region and their security was a key part of the discussions between the Prime Ministers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister, unfortunately, the Prime Minister couldn't make himself available, which is the most important thing, the part of his work that he should be doing. And we know this Prime Minister doesn't want the duties that he is assigned to. So when the Minister says that India is the longest democracy, India was founded in 1948. Yeah. That doesn't make it the largest the longest democracy. India is a human rights abuser across all of its country, across for the Sikh community, for the Muslim community, for the Christian community, and particularly more strongly for the Kashmiri community. And when she talks about signing an agreement in coming up to Diwali, they will be dancing on the human rights and civil liberties of all those people who have been persecuted in India. And will she accept that is not acceptable to us as a democracy?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we do not pursue trade at the exclusion of human rights. We regard both as an important part of a deep, mature and wide-ranging relationship with our partners. And India is a very important partner for both our countries.
Jane Barry.
As you know, East Lancashire has a wide diaspora community, not just from India, but also from the wider region, including Pakistan and Bangladesh. Will the Minister illuminate the House on what steps her department is going to take to engage that diaspora when it comes to negotiating a free trade deal, not just in India, but more widely in the region? Because I would suggest to her that entrepreneurs in East Lancashire going to work every day are better at knowing what supercharges the economy than civil servants working from home.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he makes an absolutely really important point. It is businesses and entrepreneurs that create jobs and employ people. It's not governments, and we should always remember that. It is really important that we listen, therefore, to the voices of businesses and entrepreneurs when we seek to negotiate trade deals, because the trade deals are there to try and tear down the barriers that they often face when they're trying to create those business opportunities. So their voices must be listened to as part of these negotiations.
3 British citizens, Saeed and Sakil Dawood and Mohammed Aswad, were murdered in the communal violence in India 20 years ago. Their families have been asking that the remains of their bodies, which are held by the authorities, should be returned to their families in this country. Did the Prime Minister raise that? He knows of the issue. He's been asked to do something about it. Did he raise that when he spoke with Prime Minister Modi?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he raises a very serious case of which I'm not aware of the details, but I will follow up with the noble Lord Armoured, who leads for us on Indian matters in this case. I know that the Prime Minister raised a number of different consular cases and handed over a note on various other consular cases to the Prime Minister of India, but I will ask the noble Lord Armoured to get back to him about the particular issue that he has raised.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, India has been dependent on Russian defence equipment for a very long time, and it's therefore vital in the process of our closer alignment and partnership with her that we do all we can to discuss and take forward a defence relationship that includes equipment and manufacturing. Does my honourable friend agree that actually this security reason above all makes it vital that the Prime Minister, whoever the Prime Minister of the day is, visits India and takes forward this relationship?
Minister.
I do agree that it is really important that we have a very strong UK-India defence relationship, and that is why we work together as trusted partners in the India-UK Defence and International Security Partnership framework. As I said in my opening statement, part of this is to also support the government of India's Make in India approach to security and defence. The two Prime Ministers did note the importance of robust defence industrial collaboration for manufacturing and for key capabilities. And it is absolutely correct that at this time of global security, we should be working with partners such as India to make sure that their security is more self-reliant as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree that while we all want to see an improved trading and diplomatic relationship with India, it should be on the basis of shared values, including religious tolerance and respect for minorities? So, as he isn't here to answer for himself, can she tell us what representations did the Prime Minister make to Narendra Modi about the concerns of British Muslims, including in my constituency of Batley and Spen, that Islamophobia and attacks on religious minorities are on the increase in India?
Minister.
The UK is absolutely committed to defending freedom of religion or belief for all and promoting respect and tolerance between different religions. And indeed between religious and non-religious communities, and we do condemn any incidences of discrimination because of religion. Our High Commission in Delhi and our network of Deputy High Commissioners across India regularly meet religious representatives and have run projects to help support minority rights. The Indian Constitution itself does protect all communities, but we always will raise issues to do with human rights with countries across the world where we have concerns.
Robin Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the UK holding the COP presidency, can my honourable friend confirm that the government is working to support India's energy transition away from imported oil and towards a more sustainable energy source to address both energy security but also climate change?
Yes, I mean, the UK, as president of COP, is absolutely focused on making sure that the promises that were made in Glasgow are delivered. So I was really pleased to hear that during our Prime Minister's visit, we launched the Hydrogen Science and Innovation Hub to accelerate affordable green hydrogen. We committed new funding for the Green Grids initiative that we'd announced in Glasgow, and collaboration on the public transport electrification. Globally, we also committed up to 75 million to roll out adaptable clean tech innovations from India to the wider Indo-Pacific and Africa. So this was benefiting not only India, but also the Indo-Pacific and Africa and the UK and indeed the planet.
Martin Docker to use.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all wish you and every Sikh in these islands a happy Vaisakhi, Mr. Speaker, and congratulate my honourable friend for gaining the urgent question. The Minister mentioned Scotch whisky, but not a Scot, Jagtar Singh Johal. The Minister noted on a list of priorities, but not Jagtar Singh Johal. So in their discussions with Prime Minister Modi, Can the Minister advise, did the Prime Minister, not civil servants, not about a note, directly challenge the arbitrary detention of Jagtar Singh Johal, who now faces a death penalty, and question the trial by media that my constituent has had since 2017? And if not, why not?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister did raise Mr. Johal's case, and he also handed over a note on consular cases. The 2030 roadmap for India-UK future relationships, which was agreed by the UK and Indian governments, includes a commitment to resolve long-running or complex consular cases. The Foreign Secretary has agreed to meet with the Honourable Member and for Mr. Johal's brother and wife to also join that meeting, and I know that officials are in contact to schedule that meeting.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now then, just last week the opposition parties were having a go at Rwanda. This week it appears to be India. Goodness knows what country it'll be next week. But can the Minister confirm that it's vitally important to have a good relationship with India, which benefits not just the UK but Scotland as well?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, as ever. It is the world's 6th largest economy. It's a member of the Commonwealth. It's a long-standing democracy, and it's a good friend of the UK. And we must continue to keep our good relationships going with India.
Sandra Beckham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In recent months, there have been reports that prominent Muslim women in India have appeared on unsanctioned apps, listing them up for auction, and leading public figures have openly called for Muslims to be killed. In Karnataka, a court passed a ruling to ban schoolgirls exercising their religious beliefs to wear hijab in class. So I simply ask the Minister, did the Prime Minister raise concerns about human rights violations by the Indian government, including the anti-Muslim violence that many feel is being whipped up by Narendra Modi and the ruling BJP?
Mr. Speaker, we do, it's a shocking story that she tells, but we do engage with India on a range of human rights matters. We work with both union and state governments and with non-governmental organisations. This is to help build capacity and share expertise to promote human rights for all. As she knows, supporting women and girls is a top priority of this government and of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Where we have concerns, we raise them directly with the Government of India, including at ministerial level.
Andrew Barr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday I had the pleasure of being at the opening of the next round of trade talks between the UK and the US in Aberdeenshire yesterday morning, and there was genuine excitement, particularly from the businesses represented in the room, at the prospect of a deal by Diwali with India. But as my honourable friend, the member for Gloucester, has said, of a more immediate concern, given the situation in the world right now, is our security and defence relationship. So could my honourable friend expand more on what was discussed by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi on how we can improve our defence and security relationship with India?
Minister.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for his question, and I know he, as a former member of the Royal Navy, cares very passionately about our defence. The leaders agreed to intensify cooperation as trusted partners under the India-UK Defence and International Security Partnership Framework. They noted the importance of robust defence international industrial collaboration, and they also worked specifically on the issue of cyber security in a joint cyber statement. This is to deepen the cooperation across cyber governance, deterrence and strengthening cyber resilience. The open general export licence will also reduce bureaucracy and shorten delivery times for defence procurements, and this is the first time we've signed such a deal with any country in the Indo-Pacific.
Paul Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Modi has the right to set India's own foreign policy, of course, but did the Prime Minister specifically raise India's continuing trade with Russia and Mr. Modi's decision to abstain from the UN motion condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely right. You know, every country in the world has the right to make their own decisions. And the UK shouldn't go finger-pointing at our friends and partnerships every time that we choose to decide to do something different from them. I know that the two Prime Ministers did discuss the situation in Ukraine. This is a time when it's really important that democracies do stand together and deepen their the way they work together to prevent aggression and to strengthen global security. And this is why the two Prime Ministers did release a statement immediately after their meeting in which they both unequivocally condemned the civilian deaths that have been happening in Ukraine and reiterated the need for an immediate ending of hostilities.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The trade deal with India is incredibly important, and it's extraordinary that the Prime Minister hasn't come here to make a statement, and that the government has had to be dragged here in a UQ which says the Prime Minister's visit to India. Now, we want to raise issues with the Prime Minister about human rights, religious tolerance, the impact on jobs, both here and in India, particularly on women, on peace across the world, particularly in the light of India's failure to condemn the invasion of Ukraine by Putin. What this shows is that we have a Prime Minister who is not capable of doing his job. And he is avoiding scrutiny in this House because of the troubles that he has created for himself. And it's an absolute disgrace. So what does the Minister think? That her at the dispatch box, who wasn't even on the delegation, answering for the Prime Minister, says to the Indian government?